Hey there. Tonight, we're going to talk about food. Not grand feasts or dramatic banquets with roasted boars and golden goblets. Not kings and queens or tables groaning under impossible amounts of meat. Tonight is about snacks. The small things. The quiet foods. The things people ate standing in doorways, sitting on cold steps, or leaning against market stalls while pretending they weren't hungry enough for a full meal. Because in the medieval world, food wasn't entertainment. It was survival, repetition, and occasionally, a small moment of comfort. Snacking didn't mean grabbing something for fun. It meant filling the space between meals. Stretching what little you had. Making yesterday's bread feel like today's idea. Most people didn't eat 3 neat meals a day. They ate when they could. What they could. And sometimes, whatever hadn't spoiled yet. So when we talk about medieval snacks, we're really talking about creativity under pressure. Food made from leftovers. Food made portable. Food made just interesting enough to make a long day feel shorter. If you're getting comfortable, now's a good time. Dim the lights. Set the volume low. And let your mind wander back to a world where hunger was familiar, and even the simplest bite mattered. In medieval Europe, the line between a meal and a snack was blurry at best. Bread, for example, wasn't just food. It was the foundation of life. Fresh bread was rare unless you lived near a communal oven or had the luxury of baking often. More often, bread was old. Dry. Hard enough to knock on. But it didn't go to waste. Old bread became a snack simply by changing its form. Dunked in ale. Soaked in wine. Fried in fat if you were lucky. Or eaten plain, slowly, with the quiet determination of someone who knew chewing was part of the job. Ale was everywhere, not the strong kind meant to make you forget your problems. This was small beer. Low alcohol. Cloudy. Warm. It was safer than water and cheaper than wine. And when bread met ale, it softened. It warmed. It became something new. Not delicious, exactly. But comforting. And comfort mattered. Markets were where snacks truly came alive. Market days were loud, crowded, and full of temptation. Vendors sold what could be cooked quickly and eaten fast. Hot foods. Greasy foods. Foods that smelled good from far away. Apple fritters sizzled in reused fat. Dough puffed and browned, sometimes hiding fruit, sometimes just air and hope. Cheese curds were handed over in small lumps, wrapped in cloth or nothing at all. They squeaked when bitten, if they were fresh. If not, well, freshness was relative. People ate standing. Walking. Talking. No plates. No forks. Just hands, bread, and whatever could be wiped on a sleeve afterward. Children hovered near stalls, hoping for scraps or dropped pieces. Adults pretended they weren't watching prices while calculating how hungry they really were. And all of this existed in a world without refrigeration. Without expiration dates. Without the luxury of choice. Food was what you could get. When you could get it. Before it went bad. Yet somehow, people still found joy in it. A warm fritter on a cold day. A bite of honey cake at a festival. A chunk of cheese shared between friends. Small moments. Simple pleasures. And as the night goes on, we'll move slowly through those foods. The fried things. The sweet things. The questionable things. The snacks that filled medieval lives, one bite at a time. But for now, just let yourself settle. We'll take this journey slowly. Street food in the medieval world was less about convenience and more about opportunity. There were no food trucks. No menus. No guarantees. If something hot was being sold, you ate it while it existed. Because tomorrow, the same stall might be gone. Or the oil might be cold. Or the cook might be sick. Or the ingredients might have simply run out. Markets were unpredictable like that. But fried food was always a crowd favorite. Frying meant heat, fat, flavor. And in a world where most meals were boiled into submission, frying felt exciting. Apple fritters were perhaps the closest thing medieval Europe had to a universal snack. They weren't fancy. They weren't consistent. But when they were good, they were very good. Apples back then were small, sour, and often bruised. They didn't shine. They weren't sweet by default. They had to be helped. Cooks chopped them roughly, skins and all, and tossed them into a batter made from flour, eggs, and whatever liquid was on hand. Sometimes water. Sometimes milk. Often ale. Ale made everything feel slightly more cheerful. The batter went into hot fat. Usually lard. Usually reused. Often dark enough to suggest it had seen things. The fritters hissed and bubbled as they cooked. They came out uneven. Golden in places. Burnt in others. But they were hot. And that alone made them special. If you were wealthy, the fritters might be dusted with sugar. Real sugar. Imported. Expensive. A quiet flex. If not, honey did the job. Or sometimes nothing at all. You ate them quickly. Standing. Blowing on your fingers. Accepting the risk of a minor burn as part of the experience. Cheese curds were another market favorite. They were the earliest stage of cheese. Fresh. Soft. Barely shaped. Farmers didn't always plan to sell them. They just happened. Milk became curds and whey. The curds were scooped out, lightly pressed, salted, and that was it. No aging. No ceremony. They were portable. Filling. And surprisingly satisfying. They didn't melt. They didn't stretch. They just existed. Some squeaked when you bit into them. Some didn't. Freshness varied wildly. But in a world where snacks were usually dry or cold, cheese curds felt generous. Children loved them. Travelers packed them. Monks accepted them without complaint. Sometimes they were fried. Sometimes eaten plain. Sometimes dropped on the ground and brushed off with confidence. Then there was fried dough. No filling. No toppings. Just dough, shaped by hand and thrown into fat. It puffed up. It browned. It came out looking better than it had any right to. Fried dough was cheap. It fed crowds. And it didn't ask questions. You could eat it sweet, with honey. Or savory, with salt. Either way, it disappeared quickly. Fish skin cracklings were more divisive. They weren't invented for pleasure. They were invented because waste was unacceptable. Fish were processed in large numbers near rivers and coasts. The meat went one way. The bones went another. And the skins remained. Someone, somewhere, decided to fry them. And somehow, it worked. The skins curled and crisped in hot fat. They became thin, crunchy, and intensely fishy. A pinch of salt helped. A sprinkle of herbs helped more. They were loud to eat. Crunchy in a way that announced itself. Not subtle. But filling. Soldiers liked them. Sailors depended on them. Tavern-goers tolerated them. The smell lingered long after the snack was gone. And then there were meat pasties. Handheld pies filled with whatever meat was available, wrapped in thick pastry and baked until durable. The crust was often more important than the filling. It protected the food. It kept hands clean. It absorbed grease. In some cases, the crust wasn't even eaten. It was a handle. Something to hold with dirty fingers and throw away afterward. Inside, the filling varied. Pork. Mutton. rabbit, eel. Sometimes combinations that were better left unexplained. Spices helped. Garlic helped more. People didn't ask what was inside. They didn't want to know. The pasty was warm. It was filling. And it could be eaten anywhere. That was enough. Street food in the medieval world wasn't about choice. It was about timing. You ate what was there. While it was hot. Before it was gone. And for a few moments, standing in a noisy market with grease on your fingers, life felt manageable. If medieval food had a backbone, it was bread. Everything else revolved around it. Meals were built on it. Snacks depended on it. Even hunger itself seemed to orbit the availability of bread. Bread was not soft. Not fluffy. Not sliced. It was dense. Heavy. Often baked once a week, sometimes less. By the second or third day, it became hard enough to demand strategy. But medieval people were very good at strategy. Old bread became something else. The simplest transformation was soaking. Bread soaked in ale was one of the most common survival snacks of the Middle Ages. Ale was everywhere. Weak. Cloudy. Slightly sour. It wasn't meant to get you drunk. It was meant to keep you alive. Water was risky. Ale was reliable. So when bread became too hard to chew, it was broken into pieces and dropped into a bowl of ale. The bread softened. It swelled. It absorbed warmth and flavor. What you got wasn't exciting. But it was filling. It sat heavy in the stomach. And that mattered. This wasn't a treat. It was endurance food. People ate it in the morning. At night. Whenever there was bread and ale and not much else, sometimes herbs were added. Sometimes cheese. Occasionally a fried egg, if luck was on your side. Most of the time, it was just bread and ale. And it worked. For wealthier households, ale-soaked bread evolved into something more refined. Sops and wine. The concept was the same, but the execution was meant to impress. Bread was toasted lightly, then soaked in warm, spiced wine. Cinnamon. Cloves. Nutmeg. The wine softened the bread, turning it into something spoonable. This was served at banquets. At the end of meals. Late at night. It was warm. Sweet. Mildly intoxicating. A medieval version of dessert, or at least something close enough to call it that. For nobles, this was comfort food. For everyone else, it was a reminder of how thin the line was between survival and luxury. Hardtack was less kind. This was bread baked until it lost almost all moisture. Twice baked. Sometimes 3 times. It was designed to last. Not to please. Hardtack could survive months of travel. Years, in some cases. It didn't mold easily. It didn't attract pests. It also didn't forgive teeth. People softened it however they could. Ale. Water. Broth. Anything to make it chewable. Travelers carried it. Soldiers depended on it. Sailors cursed it. But it kept people alive. And in medieval logic, that was enough. Another common snack was trench bread. Thick slabs of stale bread used as plates. Food was piled on top. Sauces soaked in. After the meal, the bread was eaten. Or given away. Or fed to animals. Nothing was wasted. The bread absorbed flavor, grease, and whatever else touched it. By the end, it was barely bread at all. It was something else. Something richer. Something earned. Leftovers were rarely thrown out. They were repurposed. Stews became fillings. Fillings became snacks. Cold meat was eaten with bread. Cold vegetables were reheated or mashed into something new. The medieval kitchen was less about recipes and more about adaptation. If something existed, it could be eaten. If it couldn't be eaten, it could probably be soaked. And if it couldn't be soaked, it could be fried. People learned quickly what worked. They learned to ignore texture, to lower expectations, to focus on warmth and fullness. A bowl of ale-soaked bread by the fire at the end of a long day wasn't exciting. But it was steady. And in medieval life, steady was everything. Medieval Europe did not understand dessert the way we do now. There was no clear moment when a meal ended and something sweet began. Sweetness drifted in and out of food quietly, without ceremony. If something sweet appeared, it was usually because an ingredient happened to be sweet, not because anyone planned it that way. Sugar existed. But it was rare. Imported. Expensive. It was treated more like a spice than a pleasure. Honey did most of the work. Honey had always been there. It didn't need ships or caravans. It came from hives behind houses, monasteries, and fields. It was thick. Sticky. Unpredictable. Some honey was light and floral. Some was dark and bitter. People used whatever they had. Honey cakes were one of the closest things medieval people had to dessert. They were dense. Heavy. Barely sweet by modern standards. Flour, eggs, honey, and fat were mixed together and baked into something closer to bread than cake. Spices helped. Cinnamon, ginger, or cloves, if you could afford them. Without spices, honey cakes were mild and forgettable. With spices, they felt important. They were baked for festivals. For religious days. For moments when effort mattered. They did not rise much. They did not crumble. They sat on plates and waited to be eaten slowly. Dried fruit was another source of sweetness. Apples. Pears. Plums. Fresh fruit was seasonal. Dried fruit was practical. It lasted. It traveled. It could be eaten whenever needed. Dried fruit wasn't soft. It was chewy. Sometimes tough. But it was sweet. And sweetness had power. People ate dried fruit as snacks. With bread. After meals. During travel. It was food that didn't ask for fire or preparation. Just teeth. Candied seeds were surprisingly popular. Anise. Fennel. Coriander. The seeds were coated in sugar, real sugar, and left to harden. This was not common food. It was for the wealthy. Candied seeds were eaten slowly, one at a time. They freshened the mouth. They aided digestion, or at least people believed they did. They were served at the end of meals, not as indulgence, but as closure. A quiet signal that eating was done. Marzipan existed, but not as a cute dessert. It was medicinal. Almonds and sugar were ground together into a paste and shaped into simple forms. Animals. Fruits. Symbols. It was served to the sick. To the weak. To those who needed strength. Sweetness was thought to balance the body. To calm it. To settle things. Most medieval desserts were not light. They were heavy. Dense. Meant to sit in the stomach for a long time. This was intentional. A full stomach meant warmth. Warmth meant rest. There were also fake desserts. Foods that looked special but were made from ordinary things. Bread soaked in honeyed wine. Fruit mashed with spices and shaped into forms. Appearances mattered. If something looked refined, it felt refined. Even if it wasn't. For most people, sweetness was rare. It wasn't expected every day. When it appeared, it was noticed. But it was never overwhelming. Never excessive. Just enough to feel different. And that was enough. In the medieval world, night did not begin with silence. It began with routines. Fires were banked. Doors were barred. Animals settled. And drinks were poured. Not for celebration. Not for excitement. But for calm. Ale was the most common evening drink. Small beer, as it was called, was weak by design. Low alcohol. Cloudy. Barely fermented. It was brewed often, consumed quickly, and trusted more than water. At night, it was warming. People drank it slowly. Not to get drunk. Just to feel steady. Children drank it too. In small amounts. Diluted. It was normal. Wine was less common. Expensive. Imported. Sometimes homemade if grapes grew nearby. Wine was often spiced. Not for luxury, but for preservation. Cinnamon. Cloves. Pepper. Spiced wine was thought to warm the body and aid sleep. It was served warm in winter, lukewarm in summer. Always measured. Drunkenness was frowned upon at night. It invited trouble. Herbal infusions were quiet companions to sleep. Chamomile. Mint. Fennel. People steeped leaves, roots, and seeds in hot water. These weren't called tea yet. They were remedies. Calming drinks for tired bodies. Milk was sometimes consumed before bed. Warm milk. Straight from the cow, if you were lucky. Milk was filling. It encouraged sleep. Though not everyone trusted it. Milk spoiled quickly, and spoiled milk had consequences. Honey was added to drink sparingly. A spoonful stirred into warm ale or milk. Not sweet, exactly. Just comforting. Nighttime drinks were not about flavor. They were about reassurance. About marking the end of the day. About signaling rest. People didn't snack much at night. Food was for daylight. Night was for digestion. For stillness. For quiet. A cup of warm ale by the fire. A piece of bread. Nothing more. The body needed time. And so did the mind. Not everyone in medieval Europe ate the same way. Life shaped food. Routine shaped hunger. And few lives were as structured as those lived behind monastery walls. Monks ate simply. Not always because they wanted to, but because rules demanded it. Meals were scheduled. Portions were controlled. Silence was common. Food was nourishment, not pleasure. But even in monasteries, snacks existed. They just weren't called that. Bread and cheese were staples. Simple. Reliable. Monks often ate twice a day, sometimes once. Between meals, if hunger came, bread was the answer. Sometimes dipped in broth. Sometimes eaten plain. Ale was common. Monastic ale was often better brewed than what most people drank. Cleaner. More consistent. Monks drank it daily, wine appeared on feast days. Sweets were rare. Honey was used sparingly. Dried fruit appeared during religious festivals or as medicine. Food in monasteries was calm. Predictable. Designed to support prayer and labor, not excitement. Travelers lived differently. Their food had to move. It had to survive. It had to make sense without kitchens. Hard bread. Cheese. Dried fruit. Sometimes smoked meat. Travel snacks were chosen for endurance. Flavor was secondary. A traveler might eat the same thing for days. Cold bread. Cold cheese. If there was fire, things improved. If not, you chewed slowly and kept walking. Markets were a gift to travelers. A hot fritter. A meat pasty. Something warm that felt human. Children had simpler tastes. And fewer expectations. They ate what adults ate, but they noticed snacks more. A piece of fruit. A bit of honey cake. These were exciting. Children were often sent to markets to fetch food. They lingered near stalls. Watched frying pans. Hoped for mistakes. Dropped food. Extra scraps. A child with greasy fingers and a smile was a common sight. Food was one of the few joys shared across ages. And for all of them, monks, travelers, children, snacks were not about indulgence. They were about continuity. About getting through the day. About finding small comforts where they existed. Medieval food was never meant to impress. It wasn't designed to be photographed. Or remembered. Or talked about centuries later. It existed to do a job. To fill the stomach. To warm the body. To make another day possible. Snacks, especially, lived in the quiet spaces of life. Between work and rest. Between meals. Between hunger and enough. They were small. Often repetitive. Rarely exciting. But they mattered. A warm fritter in a cold market. A chunk of cheese on a long road. Bread softened in ale by a dying fire. These were moments of relief. Moments where life paused, just briefly. People didn't romanticize them. They didn't need to. The comfort was immediate. And then it was gone. Medieval people accepted their food the way they accepted the weather. With practicality. If it was good, that was fortunate. If it wasn't, that was normal. They learned to appreciate warmth. Fullness. Familiarity. And perhaps there's something quietly comforting about that. Food didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to work. As the night deepened, kitchens went dark. Leftovers were covered. Bread was stored. Fires were banked. The day's eating was done. And people rested. Not thinking about what they would eat tomorrow. Because tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. And that was enough. Even after the day's work was done, food didn't entirely disappear. It simply changed tone. As evening settled over medieval towns and villages, taverns became places of warmth and low voices. Not rowdy halls of constant celebration, but practical shelters from cold, darkness, and loneliness. Taverns served food, but not in grand portions. Mostly snacks. Small things meant to keep people drinking slowly and staying a little longer. Bread was always present. Thick slices laid on wooden boards, sometimes toasted near the fire, sometimes left plain and dry. It soaked up spilled ale and softened as the night went on. Cheese followed closely behind. Often sharp. Sometimes crumbly. Occasionally questionable. It was cut unevenly and shared without ceremony. No one asked how old it was. That question rarely improved the answer. Salted meats appeared in small portions. Thin strips of pork or beef, cured heavily to survive weeks or months. They were chewy. Salty. Thirst-inducing. Which, conveniently, encouraged another drink. Pickled foods were common tavern snacks. Onions. Cabbage. Sometimes eggs. Sharp flavors that woke the mouth and distracted from the fatigue of the day. They weren't eaten for pleasure so much as for balance. Something sour to cut through the heaviness of bread and ale. Fried foods occasionally appeared, especially when the fire was already hot. Bits of dough. Scraps of meat. Leftover vegetables dropped into fat and pulled out sizzling. These were eaten quickly. While hot. While available. Late-night snacking wasn't indulgent. It was opportunistic. People ate what was there because tomorrow was uncertain. Taverns were also places where food told stories. You could tell who had money by what they ordered. Fresh bread instead of stale. Wine instead of ale. Sweetened drinks instead of plain. But even the wealthier customers ate simply at night. The body was tired. Heavy meals made sleep harder. No one wasted warmth. Even cold soup was still food. Hunger was familiar in winter. Not dramatic, but persistent. People learned to eat slowly. To pause between bites. To accept that fullness was temporary. Winter snacks were not about pleasure. They were about steadiness. Keeping the body working. Keeping the fire burning. And making it through another long night. Festivals changed the rhythm of eating. They didn't make food abundant, but they made it different. On festival days, rules loosened. Work slowed. People gathered. And food appeared that wasn't meant to last. Fresh bread was baked more often. The smell alone felt like a celebration. Warm loaves were broken and shared, sometimes before they had time to cool. Butter appeared more freely. Not spread thickly, but enough to be noticed. A small luxury. Meat was more common on these days. Not large portions, but recognizable ones. Roasted poultry. Spit-cooked pork. Sometimes shared from a single dish. Snacks at festivals were meant to be eaten while standing. While talking. While watching. Fried foods returned. Dough dropped into fat and pulled out golden. Apple fritters. Simple pastries. They were hot, messy, and gone quickly. Honey flowed more freely during festivals. Drizzled over bread. Stirred into drinks. Its sweetness felt stronger because it was rare. Children benefited most from festival food. They were given treats. Small cakes. Sweetened bread, things they didn't see often. Their excitement carried through the crowd. Candied seeds and sugared nuts appeared among the wealthy. Passed around in small dishes. Eaten one at a time. These were not snacks for hunger. They were snacks for display. As the day ended, leftovers disappeared. Festival food did not linger. It was meant to be enjoyed and then remembered. Because tomorrow, food would return to normal. Medieval people didn't just eat food. They believed in it. Food was thought to shape the body, the mind, and even the soul. Every ingredient carried meaning. Warm foods were believed to bring strength. Cold foods were thought to slow the body. Dry foods balanced wet ones. Sweetness soothed. Bitterness warned. These ideas came from ancient medical traditions that medieval Europe inherited and adapted. The body, people believed, was governed by humors. Blood. Phlegm. Black bile. Yellow bile. Food influenced these forces. A person feeling tired might be given something warm and moist. Someone anxious might be told to avoid spicy food. Snacks were chosen carefully. Not just for hunger, but for balance. Cheese, for example, was considered heavy. Eaten too often, it was believed to cause melancholy. But eaten in moderation, it provided strength. Fruit was complicated. Fresh fruit was often viewed with suspicion. Too cold. Too wet. People feared it could upset the stomach, especially when eaten alone. So fruit was often cooked, dried, or paired with bread. Honey was trusted. It was seen as pure. Healing. A food that could close wounds, soothe throats, and calm digestion. Bread carried spiritual weight. It wasn't just food. It symbolized stability. To waste bread was more than careless, it was disrespectful. Salt had protective power. It preserved food and guarded against corruption. Some believed it could ward off evil. Meals often began with a pinch of salt. Food was also linked to luck. Certain foods were avoided on specific days, others were eaten to bring fortune. Snacks were not immune to these beliefs. A traveler might eat cheese before a journey for strength. A child might be given honey to ensure sweetness in life. Even hunger had meaning. It was sometimes seen as purification. Endurance through simplicity was admired. Food was never just food. It was a quiet language. In medieval Europe, very little food was thrown away. Not because people were especially careful, but because waste simply wasn't an option. Leftovers were expected. They were planned for. Bread from yesterday became today's snack. Hard loaves were sliced thin, toasted, or soaked. Nothing about this felt unusual. It was normal. Meat leftovers were treated carefully. Cooked meat rarely stayed untouched. It was chopped and added to porridge. Mixed into soups. Or eaten cold in small pieces between meals. Fat was saved. Rendered. Stored. Used to cook the next meal or flavor the next snack. Bones were not useless. They went into broths. Simmered slowly to extract what little nourishment remained. Even vegetable scraps had value. Peels and stems became soup bases. Nothing was discarded without purpose. Snacks often came directly from leftovers. A spoonful of yesterday's stew. A crust of bread dipped in cooled broth. A scrap of cheese shaved thin to make it last longer. Food changed form instead of disappearing. Ale helped preserve leftovers. Bread soaked in ale softened and became filling again. Cold porridge could be thinned with warm liquid and eaten as a snack. Spoilage was a constant concern. People learned to recognize when food was no longer safe. Smell. Texture. Taste. These were skills. Not every mistake was avoided. But experience guided choices. Sharing food reduced waste. If one household had more than it could eat, it was passed on, especially before spoilage set in. Waste was quiet. Minimal. Almost invisible. And leftovers ensured that hunger never fully arrived without warning. Children experienced food differently. Their days were filled with movement. Running. Helping. Waiting. Snacks were important, not because they were indulgent, but because they kept small bodies going. Children ate what adults ate. Just in smaller amounts. Bread was their most constant companion. Given as a crust to chew on. Sometimes softened in milk or ale for younger mouths. Cheese followed closely. Mild when available. Sharp when nothing else existed. Fruit was often a child's treat. Dried apples. Berries. Given sparingly. Sweetness was memorable. Parents were cautious. Too much sweetness was believed to cause illness or weakness. Honey was allowed. But measured. Warm porridge was common in the morning and evening. Leftovers from it became snacks during the day. Cold porridge was eaten without complaint. Hunger taught patience. Children learned early that food was not guaranteed. They learned to eat slowly. To appreciate fullness. Snacks were often rewards. Given after chores. After long walks. After obedience. They carried meaning. Food was also teaching. Children learned what could be eaten and what could not. Which berries were safe. Which plants were dangerous. Snacks came from this knowledge. A nut gathered carefully. A piece of bread saved for later. Growing up medieval meant understanding hunger. Not as a crisis. But as a rhythm. Travel changed the way people ate. When away from home, food had to be portable. Durable. Reliable. Road snacks were chosen for survival, not enjoyment. Bread traveled well. Dense loaves were baked specifically for journeys. Hard enough to survive days in a sack. They were eaten dry, soaked in water, or softened with ale when possible. Cheese was ideal for travel. It lasted. It provided fat and strength. Travelers carried small wheels or wrapped wedges. Cut carefully to make them last. Dried meat was valuable. Thin strips of salted beef or pork. Chewed slowly to reduce thirst. Eaten sparingly. Nuts returned again as travel food. Children experienced food differently. Their days were filled with movement. Running. Helping. Waiting. Snacks were important, not because they were indulgent, but because they kept small bodies going. Children ate what adults ate. Just in smaller amounts. Bread was their most constant companion. Given as a crust to chew on. Sometimes softened in milk or ale for younger mouths. Cheese followed closely. Mild when available. Sharp when nothing else existed. Fruit was often a child's treat. Dried apples. Berries. Given sparingly. Sweetness was memorable. Parents were cautious. Too much sweetness was believed to cause illness or weakness. Honey was allowed. But measured. Warm porridge was common in the morning and evening. Leftovers from it became snacks during the day. Cold porridge was eaten without complaint. Hunger taught patience. Children learned early that food was not guaranteed. They learned to eat slowly. To appreciate fullness. Snacks were often rewards. Given after chores. After long walks. After obedience. They carried meaning. Food was also teaching. Children learned what could be eaten and what could not. Which berries were safe. Which plants were dangerous. Snacks came from this knowledge. A nut gathered carefully. A piece of bread saved for later. Growing up medieval meant understanding hunger. Not as a crisis. But as a rhythm. Travel changed the way people ate. When away from home, food had to be portable. Durable. Reliable. Road snacks were chosen for survival, not enjoyment. Bread traveled well. Dense loaves were baked specifically for journeys. Hard enough to survive days in a sack. They were eaten dry, soaked in water, or softened with ale when possible. Cheese was ideal for travel. It lasted. It provided fat and strength. Travelers carried small wheels or wrapped wedges. Cut carefully to make them last. Dried meat was valuable. Thin strips of salted beef or pork. Chewed slowly to reduce thirst. Eaten sparingly. Nuts returned again as travel food. Markets were noisy by day. But quieter by evening. As the sun lowered, stalls thinned. Unsold food became snacks. Warm things first. Fritters. Pies. Anything fried. Sold quickly before the oil cooled. People gathered not to shop, but to eat. Standing. Leaning against walls. Hands greasy. Coins small. Street food was simple. Handheld. Wrapped in cloth or leaves. Eaten slowly. Conversation was light. No one rushed. Children hovered. Waiting for crumbs. Markets smelled of smoke and fat. Sweetness drifted briefly. Then vanished. By nightfall, vendors packed up. Food disappeared. What remained was hunger, again. And memory. The comfort of having eaten something warm. Drinks were food. Often more reliable than meals. Ale was common. Low in alcohol. Warm. Cloudy. Safer than water. People drank it throughout the day. Not to become drunk. But to stay fed. Ale filled the stomach. Softened hunger. Provided comfort. Children drank it too. Weaker versions. Sweetened slightly. Milk was food and drink. Fresh only briefly. Consumed quickly. Shared carefully. Honeyed drinks appeared on special days. Rare. Slowly sipped. Wine was less common for most. Used sparingly. Often diluted. Drinks were pauses. Moments to rest hands. To breathe. To continue. A mug of ale by the fire was enough to count as a snack. Nothing more was expected. Children ate differently. Not because food was designed for them, but because they needed it. Small hands took small portions. Crusts of bread. Bits of cheese. A softened apple. Snacks were not scheduled. They happened when hunger appeared. When work paused. When adults weren't watching closely. Children learned early to accept what was given. There were no special treats. Sweetness was rare. Shared. Remembered. Snacks taught patience. Waiting for the next bite. Saving food for later. Hiding it sometimes. Children carried food in pockets. Wrapped in cloth. Forgotten until needed. Eating was quiet. Unremarkable. But it kept them going. Meals ended simply. There was no final course. No planned sweetness. When food was gone, eating stopped. Sometimes a last bite of bread. Sometimes a swallow of ale. That was enough. Dessert was not expected. Sweet foods appeared only when available. Honey. Dried fruit. Occasionally a cake. But not daily. Not reliably. Snacks filled the role we now give to dessert. Small. Quiet. Uncelebrated it. A piece of cheese at night. A crust warmed by the fire. Food did not close the day with excitement. It closed it with satisfaction. Or acceptance. People rested knowing they had eaten something. And hoped tomorrow would bring more. Leftovers were expected. Nothing ended completely. Bread hardened. Soups thickened. Cheese aged quietly. Food moved forward. Meals became snacks. Snacks became meals. Nothing had a fixed role. People planned without writing. They remembered what was left. Where it was stored. Who needed it. Leftovers were eaten without complaint. Often improved by time. Flavors deepened. Textures softened or toughened. Adapted. Food was never wasted intentionally. Saving food was survival. Tomorrow mattered. And food bridged the days. Night settled gently. Kitchens emptied. Fires were lowered. Utensils rested. Food was covered. Bread wrapped. Pots set aside. There was no late-night eating. No light snacks before bed. Hunger waited until morning. The kitchen became still. Only the smell of smoke remained. Animals shifted nearby. People slept. Food slept too. Waiting for tomorrow. Medieval people did not remember food the way we do. They didn't talk about the best meal they ever had. They didn't chase flavors. They remembered whether something was enough. Food memories were practical. Did it last through winter? Did it keep you warm? Did it stop the hunger for a while? That was memory. Snacks weren't remembered fondly. They were remembered vaguely. A fritter once at a fair. Cheese on a road. Bread softened in drink during a long night. Nothing sentimental. Just useful moments. Food wasn't identity. It was routine. And routines didn't need remembering. Monasteries were quiet places. Food followed that quiet. Meals were structured. Snacks were controlled. Monks ate to sustain prayer. Not pleasure. Bread was coarse. Cheese was measured. Vegetables were boiled until obedience. Silence was kept. Eating happened slowly. No conversation. Only chewing. Occasional gestures. Food became background. A rhythm. Something done without thought. Hunger was spiritualized. Food was accepted. Never chased. Work demanded food. But not distraction. Farmers ate while standing. While walking. While resting briefly. Snacks were portable. Crusts in pockets. Cheese wrapped in cloth. Nothing elaborate. Food was eaten quickly. Hands wiped on clothes. Work resumed. Eating was interruption, not event. And that was normal. Cold changed food. Hot changed food. Rain changed food. In winter, snacks were dense. Fatty. Heavy. In summer, lighter. Fruit when possible. Bread eaten dry. Weather shaped appetite. People ate differently without realizing it. Food followed the sky. When food ran low, creativity appeared. Scraps were combined. Leftovers reinvented. Bread soaked. Vegetables mashed. Fat stretched. Nothing wasted. Snacks were invented accidentally. From need. Not inspiration. And they worked. Smell mattered more than taste. Food announced itself. Frying fat. Warm bread. Smoke. People smelled food before eating. It prepared the body. The smell alone comforted. Even if the food disappointed. Food marked time. Morning bread. Midday ale. Evening soup. Snacks filled gaps. No clocks. Just hunger. Eating told you what time it was. Food was shared casually. No permission. No thanks. A bite offered. Taken. That was enough. Sharing meant survival. Not generosity. Older people ate softer food. Soaked bread. Thin soups. Food adapted quietly. No special treatment. Just necessity. When sick, food simplified. Bread. Broth. Watered drinks. Snacks disappeared. Hunger returned slowly. Food healed quietly. Food traditions existed. But weren't named. They repeated because they worked. Not because they mattered. Hunger sometimes woke people. They ignored it. Sleep mattered more. Food waited. Food was accepted as it was. Good or bad. Enough or not. Complaining changed nothing. Acceptance fed the mind. Satisfaction was not fullness. It was survival. Another day completed. Sometimes food failed. People adapted. They always did. There was no final meal. No ending snack. Food continued. Day after day. As fires dimmed. As kitchens quieted. Food became memory again. Unimportant. Yet essential. Food did not define medieval life. But it sustained it. Quietly. Patiently. Without needing praise. And now, as the night settles, there's nothing left to eat. A snack was not a category. It was a moment. Anything eaten between hunger and meal became a snack. There were no names for it. No expectations. A crust torn from a loaf. A piece of cheese broken by hand. A dried apple eaten while standing. That was a snack. Nothing more. Nothing less. Bread was everywhere. Always present. Always expected. It filled pockets. It filled hands. It filled time. Fresh bread was eaten slowly. Old bread was soaked. Very old bread was softened again. No bread was wasted. Every loaf became multiple snacks. Bread was the default. When nothing else existed, bread remained. Cheese lived between meals. Not eaten formally. Sliced when needed. Broken more often than cut. Cheese was quiet. Reliable. Portable. A perfect snack for roads, fields, and doorways. People ate cheese without stopping. Without sitting. Without thinking. Fat was valued. Lard. Drippings. Rendered scraps. Spread thinly on bread. Eaten alone when necessary. Fat meant warmth. Fat meant energy. Fat was eaten sparingly. But appreciated. Even a small bite mattered. Fruit was seasonal. Brief. Eaten quickly. Apples. Pears. Plums. Often small. Often sour. Fruit became snacks instantly. Picked. Wiped. Eaten. Dried fruit lasted longer. Chewed slowly. Saved carefully. Fried food was occasional. Oil was valuable. When frying happened, it mattered. Small fritters. Bits of dough. Leftover scraps. Eaten hot. Shared. Gone quickly. No leftovers. Sweet snacks interrupted routine. Honey on bread. A sugared seed. A dried fig. Sweetness was noticed. Remembered. Then absent again. Too much sweetness was overwhelming. People stopped before it was finished. Most snacks were eaten standing. Leaning. Walking. Hands busy. No plates. No ceremony. Food fit around life. Life did not pause for food. Food traveled in pockets. Wrapped in cloth. Tucked into belts. Forgotten. Found later. Eaten without comment. Pocket food was normal. Expected. Trusted. There was no snack time. Only hunger. Only opportunity. People ate when they could. Not when scheduled. Food passed silently. A piece offered. A nod. Taken. No thanks spoken. Sharing was survival. Night was for sleep. Not eating. Hunger waited. People accepted it. Children learned snacks early. Crumbs. Small bites. Nothing special. They learned to wait. Work snacks were quick. Efficient. Fuel only. No enjoyment required. Sometimes food disappointed. Too hard. Too sour. Too old. People ate it anyway. Snacks ended quietly. No closure. Just absence. Snacks left no stories. Only survival. Hunger returned. Always. No packaging. No names. No nostalgia. Snacks repeated. Day after day. Without change. Bread was not a food choice. It was a condition of life. When medieval people felt hunger between meals, they didn't ask what to eat. They reached for bread. Bread was already there. It sat on tables. On shelves. Wrapped in cloth. Hanging in bags. It existed before hunger appeared. And it remained after hunger faded. Fresh bread was soft only briefly. Warmth did not last. Most bread was eaten firm. Sometimes hard. Sometimes dry enough to scrape the mouth. But that didn't matter. Bread filled space. Bread slowed hunger. That was enough. People tore bread by hand. Knives were not always needed. A crust broken off became a snack. No plate. No pause. Just chewing. Older bread was never discarded. It was softened. Water. Ale. Broth. Anything liquid. The bread absorbed it patiently. It became edible again. Bread taught patience. You learned how long to soak it. Too little, and it stayed hard. Too much, and it dissolved. Bread was forgiving. It adapted. Every loaf lived multiple lives. First as meals. Then as snacks. Then as survival. No one praised bread. No one complained. It simply existed. And people ate it. Cheese did not announce itself. It waited. Quietly aging. Wrapped. Stored. Forgotten until needed. Cheese was not eaten ceremoniously. It was broken. Pinched. Sliced unevenly. A piece became a snack without effort. Cheese traveled well. It survived days. Weeks. Sometimes months. Hard cheeses lasted longest. Soft cheeses were eaten quickly. Smell was not a warning. It was normal. Cheese smelled like itself. People trusted it. Cheese provided fat. Strength. Warmth. A small bite mattered. Especially in cold weather. Cheese paired with bread naturally. No planning. One balanced the other. Cheese softened hunger. Not fully. But enough. People ate cheese while walking. While working. While resting briefly. Cheese did not demand attention. It allowed life to continue. Fat was precious. It was not wasted. Every drop mattered. After cooking, drippings were saved. Stored. Used again. Fat was spread thinly. On bread. On vegetables. Sometimes eaten alone. Fat meant survival. It held energy. Warmth. Endurance. In winter, fat was comfort. In summer, it was eaten carefully. Too much weighed the body down. Fat snacks were small. Intentional. A smear. A bite. Nothing excessive. People understood fat instinctively. They craved it. But respected it. Fat taught restraint. It filled quickly. It satisfied deeply. Even a little changed the day. Fried food was never ordinary. It required preparation. Fire. Fat. Time. That alone made it rare. Most medieval meals were boiled. Simmered. Softened slowly. Frying was different. It was loud. Hot. Unforgiving. When something was fried, it mattered. Oil was precious. Usually animal fat. Rendered slowly. Saved carefully. Reused many times. Each use added flavor. And weight. The fat darkened. Thickened. Remembered everything that had passed through it. This was normal. Nothing was wasted. Fried snacks were often accidental. Small bits left over from cooking. Scraps of dough. Peels. Edges. Dropped into hot fat because the fire was already burning. The result was quick food. Crisp on the outside. Soft inside. Gone almost immediately. Fritters were the most recognizable fried snack. Made from simple batter. Flour. Water or ale. Sometimes eggs. Sometimes not. Apples were common. So were onions. Herbs if available. The batter was rough. Uneven. No concern for shape. Each fritter was different. They were fried until golden. Or brown. Or darker than intended. No one complained. They were eaten hot. Burning fingers. Grease on hands. A fritter was not carried away. It was eaten immediately. Before it cooled. Before it hardened. That was the rule. Fried dough scraps were common. When bread dough was trimmed, the excess was fried. Twisted shapes. Irregular sizes. They puffed briefly. Then collapsed. Sprinkled with salt. Or honey if someone was generous. These snacks were shared. Pulled apart. Passed from hand to hand. There was no saving fried food. Once cold, it lost its magic. Fried snacks appeared most often at fairs. Market days. Festival evenings. Times when fires burned longer. When oil was already hot. Street vendors sold fried food quickly. They knew the timing. The sound told them when it was ready. The sizzle. The smell. People gathered around heat. Heat drew people in. Fried food smelled stronger than any other snack. It carried across streets. Across crowds. You smelled it before you saw it. That smell promised warmth. Salt. Fat. Enough. Even when the food was simple. Even when it was small. Fried snacks did not last. They were gone in minutes. The oil cooled. The fire lowered. And frying ended. Days passed before it happened again. This made fried food memorable. Not because it was luxurious. But because it was different. It interrupted routine. But only briefly. Then life returned to boiling. To bread. To waiting. Fried snacks were never expected. Which made them quietly special. Fruit was never constant. It appeared. And then it disappeared. When fruit was fresh, it was eaten immediately. There was no waiting. No saving. No display. An apple was picked. Wiped on a sleeve. Eaten where it stood. Fruit was a pause in routine. A small sweetness in a world that rarely offered it. Most medieval fruit was smaller than what we know today. Less sweet. More firm. Sometimes sour. But that didn't matter. It was fresh. It tasted like the season. Apples were the most common. Carried easily. Eaten slowly. Sometimes shared. Pears followed. Softer. Messier. Eaten with care. Plums and cherries were more delicate. Eaten quickly before they spoiled. Fruit rarely traveled far. It was eaten near where it grew. That made it familiar. But brief. Children ate fruit greedily. Adults more cautiously. Too much fruit was believed to upset the body. Balance mattered. Fruit was a snack. Not a meal. Dried fruit extended the season. This was its purpose. Apples were sliced thin. Pears cut carefully. Figs and dates arrived already dried from warmer lands. Fruit was hung near fires. Laid on racks. Left in the sun. The drying process took time. And attention. Dried fruit changed. It darkened. Shrank. Hardened. Flavor intensified. Sweetness concentrated. Dried fruit was chewed slowly. Saved for later. A piece could last a long time. It traveled well. Wrapped in cloth. Tucked into bags. Eaten during work. On roads. During long waits. Dried fruit felt indulgent. But modest. It was sweet. But restrained. People stopped after one or two pieces. Not because they wanted to. But because they knew it would be gone soon. Fruit taught patience. It reminded people that abundance passed quickly. And absence lasted longer. Fruit was not expected daily. Which made it meaningful. And when it was gone, people waited. Without complaint. Sweetness was not ordinary. It was rare. Unexpected. and often brief. Most medieval people did not expect sweet food. Their days passed without it, which made sweetness noticeable. Honey was the most common sweet, if you could call it common. It came from hives, from trees, from places that required effort and risk. Honey was thick, sticky, strong. It was used sparingly. A thin drizzle on bread. A small spoon in warm water. Enough to change the taste of a day. Honey was not eaten quickly. It lingered. People stopped before finishing. Not out of restraint, but respect. Sugar existed, but it traveled far. Arrived slowly. Cost much. When sugar appeared, it was handled carefully. Candied seeds were a quiet luxury. Fennel, anise, coriander. Tiny things coated in hardened sweetness. They were eaten one at a time. Placed carefully on the tongue. Allowed to dissolve. They refreshed the mouth. And the mind. Dried figs and dates were sweet without effort. They required no bees. No boiling. They were chewed slowly. Dense. Heavy. One was enough. Sweet snacks did not replace hunger. They interrupted it. They reminded people of something beyond routine. Children treasured sweetness. Adults measured it. Too much sweetness was believed dangerous. It heated the body. Disrupted balance. Sweet snacks were medicine as much as indulgence. They were given after meals. Or during sickness. Never casually. When sweetness ended, it was accepted. No one chased it. Because it would return. Eventually. Food that traveled had one purpose. To last. When people left home, food became insurance. Not comfort. Not pleasure. Just continuation. Pocket food was chosen carefully. It needed to survive movement. Heat. Cold. Time. Bread was the foundation. Dense loaves. Baked harder than usual. They resisted mold. They resisted crumbling. A piece could live in a pocket for days. Cheese followed bread. Wrapped in cloth. Tucked into bags. Cut sparingly. A little at a time. Salted strips. Chewed slowly. Never wasted. Too much meat caused thirst. People knew this. They planned accordingly. Dried fruit traveled well. Apples. Pears. Figs. A sweet interruption on long roads. Pocket food was eaten standing. Walking. Resting briefly. There were no tables. No plates. Food was handled with care. Dropped food was usually eaten anyway. The road was not clean. But hunger was stronger. Sharing was common. Travelers exchanged food. Not out of kindness. But trust. Food was safety. Travel snacks were silent. No conversation. Just chewing. Then moving again. When pocket food was gone, travel became urgent. People walked faster. Stopped less. Food decided the pace. Work decided when people ate. Not hunger. Not preference. Labor created its own rhythm. Food fit into that rhythm quietly. Workers did not stop for snacks. They absorbed them. A bite taken while standing. While walking. While resting briefly. Work snacks were chosen for efficiency. Bread. Cheese. Fat. Food that could be eaten quickly. No preparation. No mess. Hands were often dirty. Food was eaten anyway. Bread was torn, not sliced. Cheese broken off. Fat smeared thinly. Labor required calories. But not distraction. Heavy meals slowed the body. Snacks were small. Repeated. Enough to continue. Field workers ate in the open. Sun overhead, wind moving. Food tasted different outside. Simpler. Sharper. Industrial laborers, miners, builders, and smiths carried food close. Wrapped. Protected. Eaten in shadows. Work snacks were quiet. There was no conversation. No enjoyment. Just fuel. Ale often accompanied work snacks. Weak. Measured. Enough to sustain. Too much dulled the body. Workers knew the limit. Children working alongside adults shared the same food. No separate meals. No concessions. Work taught hunger management. Eat just enough. Save the rest. Food that slowed you down was avoided. At the end of the workday, snacks ended. Meals resumed. Work snacks disappeared again until needed. They existed only because labor demanded them. Children did not have special food. There were no designed snacks. What children ate was what existed. Just smaller. More frequent. Children were always hungry. Growing bodies demanded fuel. But food was limited. So snacks appeared quietly. A crust saved. A small piece of cheese. A softened apple. Food was handed down. Leftovers became children's snacks. Bread edges. Bits broken off. Food that adults didn't finish. Nothing wasted. Children learned early to wait. To accept. To eat slowly. Sweetness was rare. When it appeared, it was remembered. A drizzle of honey. A dried fig. Shared between siblings. Counted carefully. Children ate snacks wherever they were. Near doorways. By fields. Beside animals. Food was not separated from life. Children carried food in pockets. Wrapped in cloth. Forgotten. Found again. Eaten without ceremony. Hunger taught awareness. Children learned which foods lasted. Which spoiled. Which were worth saving. Snacks taught restraint. If eaten too quickly, nothing remained. If saved, something waited. Children grew used to mild hunger. Not as punishment. As reality. Food came. Then it left. And they adapted. Fat was never background. It was survival. Even when eaten quietly, it mattered more than most foods. Medieval bodies understood fat instinctively. They didn't calculate calories, they felt warmth. Endurance. Strength. When fat was present, the day became easier. Fat came from animals. Nothing was wasted. Not the skin. Not the drippings. Not the residue left behind in the pan. After cooking, grease was collected. Poured. Scraped. Stored in small containers. Often clay. Often reused until it darkened and thickened. This was not carelessness. It was necessity. Every use added memory. Flavor accumulated. Fat remembered meals. Fat became familiar. Fat snacks were rarely large. A smear on bread. A bite taken alone. Sometimes eaten straight from a spoon. Fat filled quickly. It lingered. It told the body to slow down. During winter, fat mattered most. Cold demanded it. Thin soups failed. Bread alone wasn't enough. Fat carried people through freezing days. A small amount changed everything. Fat was sometimes salted. Sometimes smoked. Sometimes infused with herbs. Not for pleasure. For preservation. Fat snacks were eaten quietly. Usually alone. Usually without pause. It was fuel. Not a treat. Children were given fat carefully. Too much overwhelmed them. Too little weakened them. Adults learned the balance early. Fat was respected. Too much made the body sluggish. Too little made it cold. Fat was eaten before long work. Before travel. Before winter nights. A smear of grease on bread could replace a meal. Fat made hunger manageable. It softened it. Extended time. Gave patience. Fat snacks were often invisible. Not mentioned. Not noticed. But without them, days failed. Food ran out faster. Bodies tired sooner. Fat was not praised. It didn't need to be. Its effect was immediate. And then quiet. Drinks were not refreshment. They were necessity. Water was unpredictable. Unsafe. Changed by place and season. So people drank differently. Liquid was food. Comfort. Safety. Drinking happened throughout the day. Not to quench thirst. But to maintain balance. A sip at a time. Ale was constant. Low in alcohol. Cloudy. Warm. Consumed by everyone. Children drank it. So did the elderly. So did workers. It filled the stomach. Provided calories. Reduced hunger. Ale was brewed locally. Often in homes. Often imperfect. But familiar. Each batch tasted different. And people accepted that. Ale was not exciting. It was expected. Water was used carefully. Boiled when possible. Drawn from known sources. Used for cooking more than drinking. Cold water was avoided. It shocked the body. People believed this. Water was rarely drunk alone. It was mixed. With ale. With herbs. With vinegar. To make it safer. Milk was food. Not drink. It spoiled quickly. So it was consumed immediately. Shared. Measured. Turned into cheese. Milk was rarely stored. It existed briefly. Then changed. Wine appeared when available. Often watered down. Used medicinally. Consumed slowly. Wine was warmth. Relaxation. Never excess. Honey sweetened drinks. Warm water. Ale. Milk. Sweet drinks were rare. Reserved. Medicinal. Comforting. A pause in routine. Herbs steeped in water. Mint. Fennel. Chamomile. Believed to calm. To heal. To prepare sleep. Drinks replaced medicine. Labor demanded liquid. Small sips. Often ale. Enough to continue. Too much slowed the body. Workers knew this. Night drinking was minimal. Ale sipped. Warm drinks preferred. Cold avoided. Drinks prepared the body for rest. Children drank watered ale. Milk when possible. Sweet drinks rarely. Habits formed early. Liquids replaced food. Broths. Infusions. Thin drinks. Healing came slowly. There were no celebratory drinks. No endings. Drinking faded into sleep. Cups emptied. Fires dimmed. Silence returned. Ale was not celebration. It was structure. For medieval people, ale was as ordinary as bread. More reliable, in many places. It appeared in the morning. It followed people into work. It remained in the evening. Not strong. Not clear. Not impressive. Just present. Small ale was brewed weak. Very weak. Low alcohol. Sometimes barely noticeable that it was brewed this way intentionally. Strong ale was expensive. Time-consuming. Saved for special moments. Small ale was everyday life. The brewing process was simple. Grain soaked. Heated. Fermented briefly. Often imperfect. Often inconsistent. Each household's ale tasted slightly different. And people accepted that. No batch was expected to be perfect. It only needed to be drinkable. Ale replaced water in many situations. Water was unpredictable. Ale was safer. Boiled during brewing. Alive with fermentation. People trusted it. Children drank ale. Watered down. Given in small cups. Elderly people drank ale. Workers drank ale. It filled the stomach. It softened hunger. It provided energy. Drinking ale was slow. A sip. Then another. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Ale was warm more often than cold. Cold drinks were believed dangerous. They shocked the body. So ale was left near the fire. Not heated. Just not chilled. Ale accompanied bread. Cheese. Work snacks. It turned simple food into something more sustaining. Ale was not meant to intoxicate. Drunkenness existed. But it was not the goal. Too much ale slowed the body. Workers avoided that. They learned their limit. Ale was also social. But quietly. Shared cups. Passed mugs. No toasts. No speeches. Just drinking. When ale ran out, it mattered. Households brewed again quickly. Running out of ale felt like running out of time. Ale marked the day. Morning ale. Midday ale. Evening ale. Night brought less. Sleep mattered more. Ale soothed. It warmed. It made long days manageable. And then the cup emptied. And nothing dramatic happened. Life continued. Honeyed drinks were never common. They appeared quietly. Occasionally. Honey itself was precious. Collected carefully. Stored carefully. Used sparingly. A spoon of honey could change a drink completely. But that spoon mattered. Honey was not wasted. It came from bees. From hives watched closely. From risk. So when honey entered a cup, it was noticed. Honeyed drinks were usually warm. Cold sweetness was avoided. Warmth softened the body. Relaxed the stomach. Prepared the mind. Honey was mixed with water. With weak ale. With milk, when available. Never heavily sweet. Just enough. The sweetness was subtle. Not exciting. Comforting. Honeyed drinks were often medicinal. Used for sore throats. For coughs. For fatigue. For restlessness. Drunk slowly. Allowed to linger. Children received honeyed drinks rarely. Only when needed. Illness. Cold nights. Weakness. Adults consumed them with restraint. Too much sweetness was believed harmful. Unbalancing. People trusted moderation. Honeyed drinks were often consumed at night. After work. After eating. Before sleep. They signaled calm. Not celebration. Just slowing. Honey dissolved slowly. Sometimes unevenly. People stirred patiently. Watching it disappear. The act itself was calming. The drink warmed the hands. The cup warmed the body. Honey did not intoxicate. It soothed. It softened. It reminded people of abundance without excess. When the cup emptied, nothing followed. No second serving. No indulgence. Just rest. Honeyed drinks were quiet endings. Not beginnings. And when they were gone, they were gone. Until the next time honey could be spared. Which might be days. Or weeks. Or longer. And that was accepted. Herbal infusions were quiet drinks. They were not exciting. They were not strong. They existed in the space between food and medicine. Between belief and habit. People did not speak of recipes. They spoke of effects. Calm. Warmth. Relief. Herbs were gathered slowly. Often by hand. From edges of fields. From paths. From gardens near the home. Nothing rare. Nothing exotic. What grew nearby was what was used. Mint cooled the mouth. Fennel softened digestion. Chamomile eased the body. People learned these things early. Not from books. From watching. From repetition. From experience. Herbs were dried when possible. Hung in bundles. Stored loosely. Used carefully. A pinch was enough. Too much ruined the drink. Bitterness was not desired. Balance mattered. Water was heated. Not boiled violently. Just warm enough. Herbs were steeped. Covered. Left alone. Time mattered. The waiting was part of the process. Herbal infusions were drunk slowly. Often at night. Often alone. They prepared the body for rest. They told the day it was ending. Children were given infusions when restless. Or unwell. Or overtired. The drink was small. The effect gentle. People believed herbs worked best when trusted. Not forced. Drinking was quiet. There were no rituals. No chants. Just cups. Warm hands. Breath slowing. Herbal infusions were not guaranteed cures. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they didn't. And that was accepted. The act itself mattered. The pause. The warmth. The stillness. When the cup emptied, sleep followed. Or rest. Or at least quiet. And the herbs returned to waiting. Until needed again. Night changed how people drank. The body was no longer preparing to work. It was preparing to stop. Drinks at night were chosen carefully. Not for energy. Not for strength. For quiet. Cold drinks were avoided. They were believed to disturb sleep. To shock the body. Warmth was preferred. Gentle warmth. Drinks were sipped slowly. Never rushed. Often taken near the fire. Or by fading light. Ale at night was weaker. Less frequent. Enough to settle hunger. Not enough to stir the mind. Honeyed water appeared sometimes. Herbal infusions more often. Mint. Chamomile. Fennel. Drinks that softened the body. And slowed breathing. Milk appeared when available. Fresh. Warm. Consumed quickly. Before it changed. Night drinks were small. Cups not refilled. The goal was not fullness. It was balance. Too much liquid disturbed sleep. People understood this. They drank just enough. Silence mattered. Talking ended. Sound softened. The cup became the final task. Afterward, hands were washed. Cup set aside. Fires banked. Light reduced. Night drinks marked the closing of the day. They were signals, not celebrations. When the cup emptied, the day ended. Thoughts slowed. Bodies rested. And the night took over. Water was everywhere. And it was never simple. In the medieval world, water was both necessary and uncertain. People needed it. They feared it. They depended on it. They questioned it. Water came from rivers. From wells. From rain. From streams that moved slowly through towns and fields. And movement mattered. Still water was distrusted. Flowing water felt safer. But not safe. Nothing was guaranteed. People learned by experience. If a village became sick, the water was blamed. If animals refused to drink, people noticed. If the taste changed, concern followed. Water was watched carefully. Cold water was avoided whenever possible. It was believed to shock the body. Especially at night. Especially when tired. Warm water felt gentler. Kinder. Boiling was common, even when not fully understood. Water was heated for cooking. For washing. And for drinking. Heating changed its smell. Its taste. Its feel. Boiled water was calmer. Less sharp. Less suspicious. After boiling, water was left to rest. Allowed to cool. Sometimes covered. Sometimes left near the fire. It might be stored in clay jugs. Wooden barrels. Metal pots. Storage was never perfect. Water absorbed smells. Smoke. Earth. Wood. Time itself. Sometimes herbs were added. Mint. Fennel. Sage. Not for flavor alone. But for reassurance. Herbs made water feel intentional. Less accidental. Water mixed with honey appeared occasionally. Not sweet like modern drinks. Just softened. Enough to change it. Enough to feel safe. Water was rarely drunk in large amounts. Small sips were preferred. The body was not meant to be flooded. Too much water was believed to weaken digestion. To disturb sleep. To cool the stomach. People drank when thirsty. Not constantly. Water had timing. Morning water was cautious. Midday water was rare. Evening water was minimal. Night water was avoided unless necessary. Thirst at night was endured. Better to wait until morning. Water was shared. Cups passed. Communal vessels were common. This spread illness. But people didn't know that. They knew only habit. Water was for survival. Not enjoyment. No one lingered over it. No one praised it. It did its job. Or it didn't. And when it didn't, people adjusted. They turned to ale. To milk. To infusions. Water was the quiet foundation. Always present. Always uncertain. And always treated with caution. As the cup emptied, the moment passed. Water did not linger. It left no memory. And that was its role. Milk was familiar. And temporary. In the medieval world, milk was never taken for granted. It arrived fresh. And it disappeared quickly. Milk came from cows. From goats. From sheep. Depending on the land. Depending on the season. Depending on the animal's health. Morning was milk time. It was drawn early. Consumed soon. Because milk did not wait. It changed. It spoiled. It became something else. Fresh milk was warm. Still holding the heat of the animal. It was comforting. But also watched closely. Milk was not stored long. A few hours at most. Sometimes less. People learned its moods. The smell. The texture. The surface. A skin forming meant time was passing. Warm milk was preferred. Cold milk unsettled the stomach. Especially at night. Warm milk felt grounding. Calming. Milk was often diluted. Mixed with water. Or used as a base for porridge. Rarely drunk alone in large quantities. Too much milk was believed to cause heaviness. To slow the body too much. Milk was not for travelers. It didn't travel well. It turned on the road. It belonged to the home. To the farm. To the morning routine. Milk was common for children. The elderly. Those recovering from illness. It was seen as gentle. But not always safe. Animals mattered. A sick cow meant dangerous milk. A stressed goat meant thin milk. People watched their animals closely. Milk was sometimes boiled. Not always. Boiling changed the taste. The texture. But it made it feel safer. Boiled milk cooled slowly. And was consumed carefully. Milk was rarely drunk at night. Except in small amounts. Near the fire. Before rest. Milk before sleep was believed to bring calm dreams. Heavy dreams. Slow sleep. Milk led to butter. To cheese. To curds. Drinking milk was often the first step. Before transformation. Before preservation. Milk did not last. That was understood. That was accepted. Milk was fleeting. A brief gift of the morning. Used quickly. Remembered briefly. And then gone. The cup was rinsed. The pot cleaned. The animal returned to pasture. And milk waited until tomorrow. Next came cheese. Milk rarely stayed milk for long. If it could not be drunk, it was changed. Heat. Time. A quiet waiting. Cheese was patience made solid. Curds were coaxed from warmth. From stillness. From hands that knew when to stop touching. Fresh cheese was soft. Barely formed. Eaten quickly. Often the same day. Hard cheese took longer. Salted. Pressed. Left to age in cool rooms. In caves. In cellars where the air stayed calm. Cheese was milk that had learned to endure. Butter followed its own path. Milk skimmed. Cream gathered. Churned until it turned. Until liquid became fat. Until effort became food. Butter was rich. Heavy. Used sparingly. A sign of comfort. Sometimes of status. But milk itself remained humble. It did not announce itself. It did not last. It did not travel. It belonged to the early hours. To quiet kitchens. To animals breathing steam into cold air. Milk asked for attention. And rewarded those who noticed. By midday it was already something else. By evening it was gone. And so each morning. Before work. Before noise. Before the world warmed. Milk appeared again. Brief, warm, alive. And everyone knew. It would not stay. Then came meat. Meat was not constant. It was an event. Animals were not food first. They were labor. Wool. Milk. Eggs. Only later, meat. Killing an animal meant loss. Of work. Of future food. So it was chosen carefully. Most days, meat was absent. Or barely present. A scrap in a pot. A flavor, not a meal. Pork was common. Pigs ate what people could not. They grew fast. They were practical. Beef was rare. Cattle worked fields. When they died, they were already old. Mutton was familiar. From sheep passed their best years. Tough. Slow cooked. Fresh meat did not last. It demanded attention. Fire. Salt. Smoke. Slaughter days were communal. Everyone helped. Everyone received a share. Nothing was wasted. Blood became food. Organs were used first. Fat was saved. Bones were boiled again and again. Meat was heavy. Warming. Grounding. Next came vegetables. They were always there. Quiet. Uncelebrated. Roots first. Turnips. Onions. Leeks. Carrots, pale and bitter. Parsnips. They lived underground. They waited. Cabbage mattered. It lasted. It fed many. It became soup. It became greens. It became sour with time. Leafy plants were fragile. Eaten fresh. Or not at all. Vegetables followed seasons closely. There was no pretending otherwise. Spring tasted thin. Summer was generous. Winter remembered. Most vegetables were cooked. Raw plants were distrusted. Cold. Damp. Hard on the stomach. Everything went into the pot. Sliced small. Softened slowly. Vegetables filled space. They stretched meals. They made broth worthwhile. Herbs mattered more than spice. Parsley. Sage. Thyme. Grown close to the door. Vegetables were daily. Reliable. Never impressive. They fed monks. Farmers. Children. They were not spoken of much. But without them, nothing else worked. When meat disappeared, vegetables remained. Always. Next came fruit. Fruit was uncertain. Sweet, but brief. It ripened all at once. Then vanished. Apples mattered most. They kept. Some sharp. Some soft. Some only good for cooking. Pears bruised easily. Plums spoiled quickly. Cherries were a moment. Then a memory. Berries were gathered, not grown. Blackberries. Raspberries. Strawberries, small and wild. Eaten immediately. Shared quickly. Fresh fruit was watched carefully. Too much caused imbalance. Cold. Moist. Troubling to the stomach. Fruit was often changed. Dried. Stewed. Mixed with honey. Cooked until safe. Dried apples hung in kitchens. Strung. Waiting for winter. Fruit-flavored porridge. Brightened bread. Softened hard days. Vine fruit became drink. Cider. Wine where land allowed. Fruit belonged to late summer. Early autumn. To full baskets and busy hands. By winter, fruit was memory. A taste saved in jars. A sweetness remembered that it did not last. But it was noticed. When fruit appeared, the year was turning. Next came fish. Fish belonged to water. But also to rules. Rivers mattered. Streams. Lakes. The edge where land softened and gave way. Fish was common in some places. Absent in others. It depended on where you lived. And who owned the water. Not all water was free. Streams had lords. Rivers had laws. Poaching was punished. Fish arrived early in the day. Pulled from nets. From traps. From lines checked at dawn. Fresh fish was fragile. It demanded speed. Cleaned quickly. Cooked quickly. Eaten quickly. If it lingered, it turned. Salt was its second life. Fish split open. Rubbed down. Layered. Left to harden. Salt fish traveled. Fresh fish did not. Herring mattered more than kings. Small. Oily. Plentiful. They fed cities. Eels were valuable. Slippery. Hard to keep. Easy to miss. Monasteries relied on fish. So did fasting days. So did obedience. Fish replaced meat. When meat was forbidden. Fridays. Holy days. Long seasons of restraint. But fish was not lighter. Not always gentler. Some fish were heavy. Greasy. Hard on sleep. Fish was often boiled. Sometimes fried in fat. Sometimes baked in paste. Spices hid age. Onions softened smell. Vinegar sharpened safety. Heads were used. Bones were sucked clean. Nothing wasted. Shellfish appeared near coasts. Oysters. Mussels. Cheap. Suspicious. Eaten by the poor. And sometimes the reckless. Fish could be dangerous. Bad water. Bad timing. Bad luck. People learned signs. Cloudy eyes. Soft flesh. Wrong smell. Fish belonged to daylight. To markets. To urgency. At night, fish was avoided. Too active in the body. Too restless. Fish filled bowls. When grain grew thin. When meat disappeared. When rules demanded it. It was ordinary. And essential. And when the nets were empty. When the river froze. When the season turned. Fish vanished. As quietly as it came. The basket was rinsed. The knife cleaned. The water kept flowing. And people waited. Next came eggs. Eggs were small. But dependable. They arrived quietly. One at a time. Next came salt. Salt was not food. But without it, food failed. It did not grow. It was found. Mined from earth. Drawn from sea. Carried long distances. Salt was heavy. Valuable. Counted carefully. A small sack lasted months. Sometimes longer. Salt preserved meat. Fish. Cheese. Vegetables pressed into brine. Without salt, winter was fear. Salt sharpened taste. But more importantly, it slowed decay. Too much salt dried the body. Too little invited rot. People learned balance. By experience. By loss. Salt was added late. To avoid waste. To avoid bitterness. Spilled salt mattered. It was noticed. Gathered if possible. Salt marked class. Fine white salt for the wealthy. Gray. Coarse. For everyone else. Salt bowls sat on tables. Shared. Respected. It traveled better than food. It outlived harvests. Salt did not comfort. It protected. Quietly. Constantly. Salt held the year together. Next came honey. Honey was the old sweetness. Before sugar. Before abundance. Bees worked where people could not. In trees. In walls. In woven skeps kept warm and dry. Honey was gathered rarely. Once. Sometimes twice a year. Never without consequence. Smoke calmed the hive. But not always enough. Bees died. That was accepted. Honey was thick, heavy, enduring. It did not spoil. It waited patiently in jars. Year after year. A small amount went far. Too much sweetness unsettled the body. Raised heat. Disturbed sleep. Honey healed. Soothing throats. Covering wounds. Mixed into drinks. It sweetened bitter food. Porridge. Herbs. Medicine. Honey-flavored ale. Preserved fruit. Bound spices together. Honey was valuable. Measured carefully. Given as gift. Used with intention. Children tasted it rarely. Slowly. With delight. Honey belonged to light. To summer fields. To buzzing air. In winter. It was memory made solid. When honey was gone. Nothing replaced it. And so it was saved. Next came spice. Spice was not everyday. It was distance made edible. Pepper arrived from far away. Cloves. Cinnamon. Ginger. Names spoken carefully. Spice was expensive. A pinch mattered. A spill was loss. Most kitchens knew only a few. Pepper, if lucky. Ginger for illness. Cloves for special days. Spice did not make food hot. It made it warm. Stimulating. Active in the body. Too much spice was dangerous. It stirred blood. Disturbed sleep. Raised appetite beyond control. Spices hid age. They softened the smell of food that had waited too long. They were protection as much as pleasure. Spice was ground slowly. Mortar and pestle. Careful hands. Spice marked status. The wealthy tasted it often. The poor tasted it rarely. And remembered. Herbs filled the gap. Local. Familiar. Safe. Spice belonged to feasts. To medicine. To moments worth marking. It did not last long in the house. Not because it spoiled. But because it was used carefully. When spice appeared. The meal meant something. It was not hunger. It was occasion. Next came sweets. Not desserts as we know them. Not plates of sugar. But moments of sweetness. Sugar was rare. Foreign. A medicine before a pleasure. Most sweetness came from honey. From fruit. From memory. Sweet foods were cooked, not baked. Porridges. Fritters. Small cakes made on stones or pans. Sweetness was controlled. Too much excited the body. Caused restlessness. Disturbed sleep. Sweets were daytime food. For festivals. For recovery. For children, in small amounts. Sweet dishes warmed. They comforted without indulgence. Dried fruit mattered here. Figs. Dates. Raisins. Imported. Expensive. They traveled well. They lasted. They tasted like elsewhere. Sweets were often spiced. Ginger. Cinnamon. Clove. To balance the cold of sugar. Sweetness marked celebration. Births. Holy days. Successful harvests. There was no daily craving. No expectation. When sweets appeared. They slowed the room. People noticed. They were eaten carefully. Next came fire. Fire was not comfort first. It was necessity. It cooked food. It made water safe. It kept tools useful. Fire was made early. Before light. Before meals. Before the day began. Wood mattered. Dry wood. Stored carefully. Wet wood smoked. Wasted heat. Ruined food. Fire was tended, not trusted. Left alone, it died. Ignored, it spread. Cooking happened close. Low. Slow. Few flames. Mostly heat. Pots hung above embers. Bread baked near ash. Not in roaring heat. Fire-shaped taste. Too much burned. Too little spoiled. At night, fire was lowered. Saved. Banked with ash. Fire and sleep did not mix well. Too much heat disturbed rest. Too little invited cold. Fire was watched by children. By elders. By those staying behind. Sparks mattered. Ash was saved. Nothing wasted. Fire ended the day. It softened food. Quieted rooms. And when it went out, the house rested too.